Hello John, this is James Finnerty. This is my screencast for CA3. As I said earlier on, the overall aim of the project was, or the overall project title was to do with osteitis pubis, which is a chronic syndrome that affects the pubic symphysis and affects the pelvic muscle and all that kind of stuff. Um, One of the main reasons we wanted to look at this particular issue, obviously from my own personal experience, but it married up very well with what you talked about all semester long in terms of gathering information, gathering statistics. I know from your own experience that, or I feel from your own experience that that would be a very beneficial thing for an injury like this, because there seems to be a lack of general knowledge on the ground with physiotherapists, with players. There doesn't seem to be an awful lot of knowledge out there of how to stop it, or in the end, when it does get chronic, of how to treat it. So our project focused in on that. We worked with a physiotherapist in Apply, David Ivers, that worked with me, and basically what we tried to do was get inside his head. What he does at the moment is when somebody comes in and they're complaining of problem in that general groin, abdominal region, because of his experience in that area at this stage, he will kind of alert himself to say that I better check this person out. What he will do, he'll run through a list of questions. He tries to find out as much about their routine, what type of training they're doing, what type of work they're doing, anything that at all. There is some reason why this pain has showed up at this particular moment in your life, and if you can zone in on what those little issues are, they start off as relatively minor, relatively small, but left unattended over a period of time, those injuries can turn into chronic injuries in the likes of osteitis pubis and some of its close relations. So as I said, I think it ties in very well with the overall content of the module, in that I think it is very definitely something where I think if you got 30 or 40 people over the course of maybe a few years in his particular physio clinic, I think if he's able to record information, record the answers to those questions, all those little things in a person's routine, the treatments that he tried, the trial and error basis. I think when that information is gathered and you can analyse that information and see where there are common trends between people, what sort of treatments worked, I think it's a very, very beneficial type of thing to be done. I think seems to be going that way. He was in the process himself of writing a kind of an article. When I went over to see him, he was in the process of writing some article to a medical journal or whatever, that of how to identify the root causes of OP, and I think it's a very, very beneficial type of thing that needs to be done. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the rules that we have implemented now in CA3. Obviously we hadn't done this very well in CA1, so the first thing we had to do in CA3 was sit down and decide what rules we wanted to implement. This is kind of a process that we started a number of weeks ago. We never really got around to it in CA2, and now we got there in the end in CA3. One of the rules that we've implemented at the start is that, obviously, as I said earlier in class, that when a person comes in with a groin complaint in the initial diagnosis, so we'll be here when the physio later on is entering that information into the database, or even maybe on the spot when he's entering information about the patient in the visit, that he will get a message to himself to say that you should apply the checklist, which is here in the problem identification table, which is all these kind of questions. Does the person play sport, etc., etc. So that's the first rule that we've tried to implement. Obviously this rule meant changing the databases in some ways. We had to extend, we extended a good few tables in CA3, but we extended this one. We had to extend the appointments table for the next couple of rules. We're going to talk about next visit, attendance, SNOMED code went in there as well. So we extended that particular table, not necessarily for the groin diagnosis rule, but we did have to extend it for the rule that would say that when you give a patient a next visit, as you can see there, that the physio would give an email, or would have a warning or a message to himself to send an email or a confirmation text to that person, so that in a couple of weeks' time, when that person's getting ready to come to the appointment, that day can look back and say, was it 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock I had to come in. The third rule then is relating to the date of visit. Or sorry, not the date of visit, the attendance at your next visit. So there's the next visit. You get a next visit, and it's a simple case of they get a warning message to say, again, it's a warning message to themselves to send an email to that person if they don't show up. Another rule we had on the system here is in the other diagnosis table, which is an extra table that was added. This one basically, as I said in class, we have an outcome of treatment and treatment prescribed. So if the treatment, whatever that may be, swimming and things like that, could be part of the thing. Rest is probably more, stretching exercise is probably more integral to the treatment, but the outcome of that treatment is negative or positive. So if it's a negative treatment, then obviously the patient will get a warm message, maybe it's time to try something else. And as I said in the presentation, I think this is a good one, because over time that message will change, that as the physio becomes more experienced of what works and what doesn't work, he can say that, I've tried rest, the next step, needs to be stretching exercises rather than, it's swimming here, but it could be any number of treatments really. So he will learn over time, and that message can change over time. It's just a little reminder to himself, maybe a little bit of experience that can be brought to bear. Okay, I'm just going to implement these rules now. We've added a login to the system. As you can probably see, there's an array list printed in the main menu or in the main method at the moment, which is something we had to kind of bodge a little bit, because HL7, when I tried to put this array list back in to the method where it should be printed, for some reason the HL7 didn't recognize it, and we just didn't have time to clean it up. So it's a little bit untidy, a little bit unpleasant, but it's there. Again, as I said in the presentation, it was about functionality rather than brilliant design. So press 1 to log in. Again, the login is just something that we have added based on your recommendation from CA1. So we can log into the system, and then we get our main menu of 20 options. So most of these rules are on the appointments table. So number 3 goes into have to enter the patient ID. Enter 4, it's the date of visit. Diagnosis, so if it's groin, it should give me a message, and it does. Next appointment, again, it should give me a message to make sure that what if physio will send an email or text message confirmation, and then if they don't attend, the next one they get a message there, make sure you send a reminder to come in when possible. And the SNOMED code has to go into the database at this point as well in the appointment. So that basically implements the 3 rules that we've talked about in class today. There's another one down here that Vera implemented on the other diagnosis table. Again, as I said in class, we had a little bit of trouble at times running the 2 codes off each other, and we just weren't in contact for long enough on Monday evening. We had an awful lot of other stuff to do. Just didn't get this. It always sent across to me on Monday evening. I just didn't get it pulled into my system. I got the parts that I really needed pulled in. Okay, so whilst I have the menu up, now might be as good a time as any to talk about the overall project code. Obviously, as we've seen today, we're working off a main method and a patient's class. Okay, so the patient's class really is the driver for the main menu, or for the main method. We've everything going on. As discussed with Tony, it's probably not the best way to do it. We have an awful lot of other stuff going on over here as well, but it doesn't offer any functionality in terms of the main code. So if I go back to the menu, there's 20 odd options there. We still have all our options to insert from all the tables, search all the tables. We have write to XML, read from XML, write patient details in HL7. We can do summary statistics. We have rules on some of the inserts, and I think Vera's one is in on a search, and we have I think that's pretty much it in terms of what the code is supposed to do. It achieves most of the functionality that was asked for, maybe not in perfect light, but most of it is there. Myself, I wrote a good bit of the code in this project. I would have had a hand in pretty much all of it really. Going back to the start, I would have wrote all the searches and inserts with a bit of help from Red along the way. In CA2, I would have focused mostly on the writing from taking the information from the database and then writing it to the XML file. But to get it working on my machine, again, as I said earlier on today, Elvira had a system for reading that was working on her machine, but she had done a few things that I hadn't got in the top of my code, so I had to change a few things around. I think that was one of your suggestions that actually got me over the line on that, so would have done a fair bit in that as well. And in CA3, I would have focused on the HL7, I would have done most of the rules in the appointment table, and I would have done summary statistics that I'll talk a little bit about later on. Also would have done the patient class and some of the stuff that's going on in the main menu, in the main method, the array list that we're using for the XML and for the HL7. Tidying up the menus. Would have done a lot of code in this. Just unfortunately, I think time kind of caught us in terms of Tony's, that we should have sat down 3 or 4 weeks ago really and decided how we were going to start this from scratch. I know some of the other groups started more or less from scratch. We kind of didn't do that. There was a good bit of work for you in CA3, and it just kind of crept up on us a little bit too soon. And all these things up here are efforts to try and show that we know what we should possibly do if the situation arose where we had to redesign this, but we just didn't get to it. It was a case, as I said in class today, of just making that firm decision, functionality or good design, and I chose functionality. Okay, so again, whilst I'm here at the menu, I might as well show the summary statistics. Number 11 just is a simple one, just to show the percentage of people who report in with groin pain. This is basically just that it's counting the amount of times in our appointments list that the word groin is entered. So it actually took a good bit of pulling together this one. I think there was 3 or 4 different methods I used to do it, and more or less had to get the total number of patients, the total number of appointments, count the groin reports, and then I have a count groin reports method, which takes in the methods, get total appointments, get groin reports, so they're just underneath. So I use them, queries from databases and stuff like that. Then by extension of that particular statistic, we can query the amount of appointments that we have, which at the moment stands at 18, and then the amount of patients that we have, which stands at 20. Haven't obviously entered appointment details for a couple of patients yet. There is another summary statistic at the end there. This was one that Elvira did to count the number of positive outcomes, so that relates back to the other diagnosis table. At the moment it's 50%. Okay, so just while I am here again, I'll just do number 12 to enter the HL7. So we showed today we have a HL7 message for all the patients in our database. We use PID to get the first name and second name. We didn't use the IDs because the IDs have been taken out in the last CA. We decided just to focus, our intention was just to focus in on getting information coming back from 2 tables. So we also done a bit on the diagnosis. So that's the SNOMED code, that's the diagnosis, whatever's in the database, and that's the date of visit. We tried to extend on a little bit about healthcare profession and stuff like that, but we got into a little bit of trouble the more methods we started to use. So the HL7 code is probably one of the trickier bits of code I wrote in this. Took your example, found very little online and things like that, but much help. So again, the general logic for it was, I think that we had been able to write from a database to an array list, and then write from an array list to an XML. So we used that kind of logic in how we were to go about it. We used the same array list. We basically went the same way. We used the same kind of for each loop here, which means that it'll print it out for all the people. These values here stayed pretty much the same, although I think one of them, as you said in class, is supposed to be unique for each individual patient. The methods here, we got PID and DGI above. Again, it took a good bit of working out how to do this. We followed the examples